Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail. I'm pleased to be joined on today's episode by Ellen Webb, who is the Vice President, Shopper Analytics and Insights at PepsiCo. Ellen and I are going to be talking about PepsiCo's efforts around targeting and servicing the Gen Z community and kind of how their behaviors are impacting retailers and in turn what PepsiCo is doing to better serve its retail customers as well. So thanks for joining me today, Ellen.
Awesome. Glad to be here, Joe.
So I want to talk about pepviz. It's a new initiative from PepsiCo and kind of the role it plays within the PepsiCo organization.
Yeah, so pepviz is really, it's about an approach. I think people ask that question a lot. They're saying, what exactly is pepviz? And it's really our approach to building stronger partnerships with our retail partners to really come together with the ultimate goal of driving food and beverage growth and on the backs of the power of data and insights. So it's really about coming together with our retailer partners and bringing the best of what we have together to shine light on new opportunities to grow. And it's not just within our external partners, within our organization as well. We're leveraging this approach to increase the performance, for our brands as well. And it's really about, again, how do we come together, really simplify and seek to understand the problem to solve, and then bring the right data, the right analytics to uncover those solutions that can really, again, solve that problem to solve versus overwhelming with, the technical aspects of all this, data and analytics. It's really about getting to the root of the problem to solve.
Yeah, that's and to your point, internally and externally, that data collection is taking place. I'd love to know what I mentioned at the outset. I want to talk a little bit about one specific consumer demographic, and that's Gen Z. As you kind of poured through the data, what are you learning about the shopping behaviors of that particular demographic, the Gen Z shopper?
Yeah, sure. And I'll start with just why we're talking about Gen Z. And I think, a lot of people probably listening to this podcast know this, but it is the most diverse generation in history and are really quickly, poised to become one of the most important growth cohorts for food and beverage. So we see today their purchasing power is about $143 billion, but their influence, and I'll come back to that later, their influence on purchase is more than double of that at about $333 billion. So the opportunity is significant. But beyond that, it's really about getting to know who they are as people, as consumers, how they shop. And so we've spent a lot of time, in the past months doing that. And what we've really found is they're defined by a series of contradictions that really make this more challenging. And I think some of them are generational, just as a function of being a part of this Gen Z, but some are also life stage driven. So it's really about understanding, what are those specific, things that we can do to break through. And one of those that we've really honed in on is they're both digitally native and a huge fan of in-store experiences. So they are twice as likely to shop on mobile devices compared to millennials. And about 1/3 of their transactions take place digitally. But at the same time, they're the most likely generation to browse in-store and are more likely than other shoppers to really prefer pickup over delivery. So that's just one as you think about contradictions. It's like trying to span, that in-store and that digital experience. Another example is they really care about more than just, products and premium products. They really want to support the brands that share their values and connect with them in an authentic way. And that theme of authenticity and just realness is something that I think has come through loud and clear in terms of meeting this generation to really match what they're looking for. And I mentioned I was going to come back to this concept of influence. And I think, as we've had discussions about this generation and, younger generations in general, they've just got this incredible outsized influence on older generations. So a lot of what I just described likely resonates to some of the listeners here that are probably millennials and Gen Xers, but perhaps to a lesser degree. So I think as we're thinking about this generation and, meeting them where they are and meeting what their needs are, there's this really incredible halo effect that if done well, I think can drive growth and resonance, not only with the Gen Z generation, but also more broadly in the marketplace.
I love how you put it, Ellen, in terms of this demographic being defined by a series of contradictions, which makes your job challenging, right? As you think about the data, those contradictions that exist as you try to serve up experiences to those customers. Based upon that, what actions have you taken at PepsiCo to kind of win over those Gen Z customers and kind of get them to be loyal to PepsiCo? Is there specific action items you've taken?
Yeah, I would say there's a few things that we can point to that we've taken. I think, given this generation really living more of their life through digital platforms, you're seeing us probably lean into that quite a bit across everything that we do, but at the same time, making sure that we're, driving that deeper, authentic connection to the wider world and to our brands. And so I think that as you think about what you're seeing with our brands, there's a lot of just really that authentic voice that's coming through that I think has always been there in terms of how we market to consumers in general. But I think really seeing that come through as well. And I think the other piece from our retailer perspective is really how do we bridge this gap and kind of make a seamless integration of media and technology to bridge physical and virtual spaces. So this whole concept of phygital environment. So how are we integrating what people are seeing and experiencing online, then have that represented in the in real life experience, and bringing the best of those together and in a seamless way, so people don't feel that it's, oh, I'm here online and now I'm switching to this in-store experience. It's a really seamless experience, and really amplified and bringing out the best of technology and the digital aspect of it.
With all of this information that you and your team are collecting, and I'm interested in how you collaborate and kind of share some of those important data points and characteristics and these models and
Yeah.
kind of that you're putting together with not only your retail partners. So maybe we'll start there because I actually have a follow up, but I'll start there. Let's talk about kind of the relationship with your retail partners and sharing that information with them.
Yeah, and I would say our retail partners are incredibly important to us, and we've built an over time really strong relationship with them, and are in constant communication through just the typical course of our business. And through that, again, going back to this approach that we take is really seeking to understand what are the problems that they're trying to solve for, and how can we bring the right insights to them to really collectively optimize their operations. So it's about, through again, our joint business planning processes and just the general course of business. It's a really kind of constant communication, but again, making sure that we're curating the information that we're sharing with our retailers, to help them with their problems to solve, but also to supplement, what they know about their customers. If you think about, our customers, they know their shoppers, incredibly, incredibly well. What we can bring to the table is really understanding what those shoppers are doing when they're outside the retailer's four walls, whether it's physical or virtual. So that's really an important aspect of how we engage with our retail partners.
And then my follow-up to that is internally, how, and I'm specifically thinking about how your team might collaborate with marketing and brand teams as you think about that digital influence and kind of the content you're bringing to market. You're kind of, I would imagine, informing some of that messaging, right? Can you talk to how that might be a symbiotic relationship between, the analytics and insights team, and then how you work with marketing and brand?
Yeah, so I have some great colleagues that lead our consumer insights team that are really focused against, that helping and partnering with our brand partners to make sure that the messaging is reaching the right target consumers. I would say from a shopper perspective, it's really about how does that messaging and that, how does that show up with our retail partners, all the way down to the shelf. So making sure that, whatever the brand is talking about from their perspective, making sure that those products then show up where those shoppers are, in those right stores at the right moments to make sure that we're meeting them at that time. So it's really about that end-to-end, kind of insights and analytics, both from consumer down to shopper, down to shelf. That's really helping us to build that gap and build that bridge, and have that connection.
I have a kind of a process question for you, Ellen, in
Yeah.
terms of the data collection. Tell us a little bit about how that works with your retail partners, because in many cases they kind of own that relationship, and you alluded to that. They
Yep.
they are having that face-to-face interaction with the customer coming into their, the four walls of their retail store. Tell us a little bit about how that works, and then because obviously you've kind of spoken to it, that's going to inform future decision making from PepsiCo's part.
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. And I would say, as we talk about data, I think the first and foremost thing is just to make everybody, understand that the how we treat and collect our data is done with responsible use in terms of information guidelines. We're leveraging it in an anonymized manner, so not leveraging any PII. So we really take data privacy and responsible usage really, really seriously. So that aside, we've got a lot of data sources that we're using. So we've got open source data, first, second, third party data. We've got some proprietary household data. And then we also, through the advantage of our DSD network, we have a massive amount of information that comes from that. So I've just talked about there's a lot of data that we're collecting, and then how do we actually then stitch that together and do something with it? So it's really, as we think about data collection and what we're purchasing and collecting, it's not just for the sake of the data, it's about what the data sets when paired together can do to generate actionable insights. So that's where the use of advanced analytics, statistical analysis, ML, AI come together to produce those actionable insights in a way that's efficient for us. And really getting to the core of how we, bring that all together to understand, what is that consumer looking for? How does that come to life from a shopper or a store perspective? And being able to pinpoint those store level opportunities to unlock that granular growth.
Yeah, before I am going to touch on that, kind of the role of technology. Obviously at the massive scale of an organization like PepsiCo, this cannot be a manual process. There's tools, there's technologies that are helping you there.
Yeah.
Before I get into that, though, let's talk a little bit about, and you've talked about this with the back to the Gen Z shopper, that authentic experience, and part of that, and you've talked about data privacy and respecting that and the personal identifiable information of the shopper. How does that show up for the end user in terms of they want that personalized experience, but they also might not know how they're receiving it? Tell us a little bit about giving that personalized experience while also respecting data privacy rights.
So I would say it's really about how we bring together large sets of data to find like groups of people so that we can talk to them as a group. So the concept of segmentation, of targeting and clustering, it's bringing together people who have similar needs, who have similar wants, who, live in similar places, whatever those different attributes are, to really target them. It's a kind of personalization at scale is probably the best way to articulate it. So it's not, any one individual person, but that messaging that person is receiving is going to look similar to what, the other people that act or have, similar need states are going to see as well. So it's, again, not necessarily a one-to-one relationship, but a one-to-many as we think about those targeted messaging. And again, similar to an in-store experience, as we think about, the how things show up in the store and in the shelf, we have to balance the need for that granular execution with the ability to actually execute that from an operations perspective. So there's a lot of things that we do to say, how are we bringing the best experience to this person in this store in a way that we can execute it seamlessly? Because if we can have incredibly granular plans, but if we can't execute them, the plans are worthless. And so there's a really fine balance that we take to get to that.
And to your point, let's talk a little bit about the technology, artificial intelligence, ML. That's obviously aiding in PepsiCo's data analytic efforts. That segmentation, that clustering, those models that you're building. Tell us a little bit about the role of technology there, and maybe there's an example that you can share.
Yeah, so I would say, it's obviously AI ML is the name of the game right now. There's tons of discussions around this. And I would say as we continue to build and create these actionable insights, where we continue to incorporate the latest technologies to find ways to add value to our partners, which has certainly included forms of AI through some of our data modeling. But as we think about it at a higher level, I think it comes in two places, which is, efficiency, which is making sense of these. I just talked through the litany of the long list of data sources that we're collecting. How do we use those technologies to make sense of those massive data sets and getting accurate insights out of them is one thing. And I would say the second piece is just the effectiveness. So enabling us to operate with a higher level of granularity and being able to get that out to our frontline sales teams as well. So I think, I was in a role several years ago, and we were talking about how we get store level communication out to our field around, again, like I was just talking about, having a granular approach show up in a store. And we were literally having an actual conversation, and this was many years ago, so it's not happened recently, but how we actually produce thousands of one-pagers in PowerPoint, print them out, and get them to the field teams, which even saying, remembering that right now just kind of gives me the shakes a little bit. But I think that starts to get the idea of we've had capabilities for quite some time, and part of the challenge and the advantage that we can get from the technology is not only in generating the insights itself, but how do we get it into execution in a simple, really easy to understand way? So there's a lot of progress that the team has been making there, so that we can, bring these incredibly, technologically and analytically driven insights and plans into, simple and easy to execute direction for our teams.
And quickly, right? To your
Yeah,
point, the speeding up of the process. I guess I have one final question for you, Ellen. Given we've talked kind of at the outset of the Gen Z and their buying behavior, as you try to keep pace, and it doesn't have to be just speaking specifically to Gen Z, but consumer behavior shift, and they shift pretty quickly based on a number of different factors.
sure.
How do you and your team think about that as you look at the data? I guess trying to keep pace with those changes in behavior and be almost one step ahead, right? You kind of, if you're even, you're almost behind. Tell us a little bit as you think about forecasting and using data to kind of predict what's to come next.
Yeah, I would say, if I had a wish list for the one thing that I could have in my job, it would be a crystal ball to project the future. But unfortunately, I don't have that. But what we do have, I mean, we've got years of shopper research and insights work. Then we kind of know that there are just some universal truths that consumers are shoppers are looking for. And I'll talk to, shoppers from people are always looking for convenience and making things less frictionless, as an example. And so but what is changing is how that actually manifests. So for some people, that's being able to, order something online and it shows up to your door, or being able to pick it up in the store and not have to, do the shop itself. So that manifests in lots of different ways. And so I think that's how, from a conceptual perspective, it's saying, okay, what do we believe these universal truths to be, and how are they manifesting differently at different rates of speed? And I think we saw through the pandemic, the whole e-com boom is something that, it accelerated a trend that was starting to happen already. So to the extent that things are naturally going to happen as technology progresses, as shopper and consumer demands progress, but what are those potential things that will accelerate those that we need to be ready for? So I think it's trying to summarize it, it's trying to not overthink it and say, what are the things that we know that we will expect to continue to be true, and what would need to change for those to change? Because at the end of the day, human behavior, it doesn't change that quickly. We're creatures of habit. But if we find something that can be something that saves you a lot of time, that's something that becomes more advantageous for them, and it creates a new challenge for us in their retail space to deliver against that. But I think, again, the name of the game is let's not overthink it. I think when we've got so much data and so many insights, sometimes we get buried in that, and we have to kind of dig back out and say, okay, what are we actually trying to track here?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And it is kind of reflective in the approach that you've taken, and the pepviz strategy and initiative kind of speaks to that.
Yeah.
So I want to take the opportunity to thank Ellen Webb, again, the Vice President, Shopper Analytics and Insights at PepsiCo, for joining me on this episode of Total Retail Talks. Thank you, Ellen. This has really been a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I would encourage everybody to check us out at pepviz.com, as well as follow us on Industry Insiders on LinkedIn, where I talked about earlier how we share these insights with all of our retail partners, but we're sharing them out on socials as well. So I'd encourage you to give us a follow and be on the lookout for our next insights drop.
Yep, and I second that. Definitely take advantage and take a look at those resources that Ellen just mentioned. So thank you for the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Talks.